Of all the teachings the Buddha ever gave, there's one that kind of stands above all the others. Not because it's more important, but because, well, it contains everything else. We're talking about dependent origination. And trust me, this is not just some dusty, abstract doctrine. This is the master key. It's the actual blueprint for your experience, the very architecture of your mind. So yeah, let's dive into this.
I mean, the Buddha himself put it this way, and this isn't just poetry, it's a super precise statement. He said that if you see this one teaching, you see it all. Karma, non-self, emptiness, nirvana, they're all just different ways of talking about this one core insight. If you miss this, you kind of miss the whole point of what he was trying to say.
All right, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll talk about why this is the Buddha's master key. Then, we're going to do something interesting. We'll trace the logic from the effect all the way back to the cause. We'll unpack what I'm calling the experience machine, the 12 links in the chain. Then we'll find the absolute root of the loop, and finally, figure out how to break the chain for good.
So dependent origination is basically the mechanism by which suffering gets created. And, get this, it's also the mechanism by which it ends. I want you to think of it like an algorithm. It's this code that's constantly running in the background of your mind, generating every single thought, every emotion, and every pattern you experience in your life.
And what's so wild about this is just how personal it is. I mean, have you ever found yourself thinking, why do I keep ending up in this same situation? Why do the same old patterns keep happening to me over and over again? If you've asked that, you're basically asking about this algorithm, and you're about to see the source code.
Okay, so to get this algorithm, we have to grasp its most foundational principle. We usually think of reality as being made up of separate things, right? There's you, there's me, there's the chair you're sitting on. But the Buddha saw it completely differently. For him, reality isn't made of objects, it's made of relationships. It all boils down to this one simple, powerful phrase. When this exists, that comes to be. To really get this, let's follow a story about a monk who was really wrestling with this idea. He kept going up to the Buddha and asking a question that honestly seems perfectly logical to us. He'd ask, "Okay, Master, you teach about suffering and birth and death, but whose suffering is it? Who is doing the suffering?"
And the Buddha's answer just brilliantly shows this massive shift in thinking. He basically said, "You're asking the wrong question." He flat out refused to answer who suffers. Instead, he explained how suffering arises. He replaced the idea of a self who suffers with the idea of a process that generates suffering. The whole focus moves from a noun to a verb, from a person to a process.
So now, let's pop the hood on that very process. The Buddha mapped it all out with 12 interconnected links, like a chain, and we're going to deconstruct it by working our way backward, starting from the most obvious results of suffering, like aging and death, to uncover the hidden causes that get the whole thing started. Now, I know what you're thinking, 12 links is a lot to remember. So let's simplify them into 3 major movements, okay? First, you've got the results we all experience. Birth, getting old, death, the whole shebang. These are driven by our actions. Things like craving, clinging, and becoming. And those actions are powered by the root cause, which includes feeling, contact with the world, and at the very, very beginning, ignorance. And these 3 movements just feed each other in this endless loop.
Let's zoom in and see how this actually works, starting with clinging, or in Pali, upadana. The word literally means fuel. The idea is that the unenlightened mind is like a fire that is constantly, desperately looking for fuel to keep burning. And that fuel, it could be our opinions, our desires, our identities, or even just that subtle idea that there's a me in here somewhere.
Let's make this super real. Imagine you get ghosted by someone you really, really like. Your mind immediately starts to feed. You might grab onto and cling to the identity of the rejected one. And in that instant, your entire world changes. You are now living in the reality of the rejected lover. Time feels different. Food tastes bland. That's it. That's clinging, creating an entire mode of existence out of thin air.
But what happens right before you cling to something? Well, that's craving, or tanha. This is that subtle, constant background hum of wanting your experience to be different. Wanting the good stuff to last forever. Wanting the bad stuff to just stop. Or wanting the neutral stuff to get more interesting. It's the itch that comes right before the scratch of clinging.
And what triggers that craving? It's something even faster, even more fundamental, feeling, or Vedana. Now, we're not talking about complex emotions like love or jealousy here. This is the mind's automatic, instantaneous tagging of every single experience as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. A nice comment creates a pleasant feeling, which immediately triggers craving for more.
A criticism creates an unpleasant feeling, triggering craving for it to go away. This happens in a flash, before you even have a chance to think about it.
Okay, so we've traced clinging back to craving, and craving back to feeling, and feeling comes from our contact with the world. But if we keep pulling on that thread, where does it lead? What is the very first domino? What's the ultimate source that kicks this whole chain reaction into gear?
We finally arrive at the root cause, ignorance, or avijja. And this is so crucial. This isn't about being unintelligent or not knowing enough facts. It's an existential delusion. It's the fundamental misunderstanding of the Four Noble Truths. It's not seeing that constantly chasing permanent happiness in a world where everything changes is the very loop that creates all our suffering.
And this brings us right back to our monk. Remember him? After the Buddha laid out all these links leading back to ignorance, the monk just stopped asking his question. Why? Because it finally clicked. The very question he was asking, whose ignorance is it? That deep-seated assumption that there's a someone in there who owns the experience, that is the core ignorance the Buddha was pointing to all along.
And here is the secret key to the whole thing. This entire system, this whole chain of suffering, can only operate as long as it's ignorant of itself. It's exactly like a nightmare that only feels real as long as you don't know you're dreaming. The moment you truly see the machine for what it is, this automatic, impersonal process, it begins to lose its power. It starts to dissolve. The observation itself is the antidote.
Okay, wow. So we've mapped out the problem, we've seen the algorithm that creates suffering. So the big question is, how do we use this knowledge to actually break the chain? How do we find the path to liberation? First, we have to get really clear on what liberation, or nirvana, actually is. It's not about escaping this world and going to some other, better place. Samsara, the cycle of suffering, is simply the machine running on its loop of ignorance. Nirvana is just seeing the machine for what it is. They are two ways of looking at the exact same reality. The shift is in your perception, not your location. And this leads to a pretty wild idea, maybe the most radical part of the whole teaching. The Buddha taught that suffering itself, when you see it clearly, becomes the very condition that leads to faith, to joy, and ultimately to freedom. The nightmare actually contains the tools you need to wake up. The problem, once you understand it properly, contains its own solution.
So how do you start? What can you actually do, like, today? It's simpler than you might think. You can start with these 3 steps. First, just observe feeling. As you go about your day, just try to notice that automatic tag of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that your mind slaps on everything. Second, notice the craving that follows. Just watch that immediate urge for more, for less, or for different. And third, start to identify your clinging. Ask yourself, what stories, what identities do I build my life around? What am I so attached to that I would be devastated to lose it?
And here's the most empowering part of all this. You don't have to become a master of all 12 links. You don't have to fix the entire system at once. The goal here isn't perfection. It's just observation. Just seeing one link clearly, that tiny gap between a feeling and the craving that follows it, that simple act of awareness begins to loosen the grip of the entire chain. Seeing is the most powerful force for change in this whole system.
So we've gone from the very end result of suffering all the way back to its deepest root in ignorance, and we've seen how awareness itself is the way out. You now have the map. You've seen the algorithm that builds your world moment by moment. The only question left is, where are you going to begin to look?